Hello, my name's Jenna Fornell. I'm with the National Council of Teachers of English, and tonight I'm joined by Iris Ruiz, who's a lecturer at UC Merced, and she's going to be talking to us about the NCTE position statement in support of ethnic studies initiatives in K-12 curricula. Iris was a member of the Ethnic Studies Task Force, whose members included Christina Cedillo, Alexandra Hidalgo, Iris, and Dale Allender, and she was the head of that committee. And tonight she's going to talk to us about this new statement and its implications and opportunities, not only for NCTE members, but for teachers across the country. So welcome, Iris.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. Let's jump right in. Can you tell me about the genesis of this statement and why it's something that we need right now?
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to start off with a practical answer to the question and a little bit of history. So basically, at the last 4Cs conference in March 2015, I presented a version of this ethnic studies statement to the Latino caucus at our business meeting. And the reason for that was that I was actually running for the co-chair position, and part of my platform was that I wanted the caucus support for this ethnic studies statement. And I had overwhelming support for this statement, and it was thanks to Dr. Victor Villanueva, who put me in touch with Dale Allender, who actually then put me in touch with the NCTE presidential team to work on the statement, because that statement initially was a very different version from the statement that's actually posted now. It was a lot longer and actually read more like a scholarly article. And so, yeah, so it was a learning experience overall, trying to put the statement together that would be more friendly towards legislation and for school board members and also for K through 12 educators. And it took basically about 8 months to put the statement together in the format that it is now. And our task force was a very great task force to work with, and they were all very resourceful, and they reached out to other caucuses and the translingual SIG and other faculty members who all contributed resources to the statement. And so that's basically kind of the genesis of the practical nature of the statement. And I also wanted to give a little bit of historical context to the ethnic studies statement, because I do feel that it's something that's very timely today. And so basically looking back at the history of ethnic studies, it was basically in 1968 when there was a student protest at the California State University, San Francisco, by the Third World Student Liberation Front that took place there. And what the students were protesting about was they wanted the implementation of ethnic studies. So like I said, this happened in 1968, almost exactly 47 years ago. So it started on November 6th. So it's kind of interesting that the statement has been posted about 47 years exactly to the date. At that time, students were very animate about wanting the implementation of ethnic studies in the university system, and that started a movement. And at that time, ethnic studies pretty much spread over higher educational institutions. And so here we are in 2015, and we're kind of seeing a movement. And there's actually a name for this movement, and it's called Ethnic Studies Now. And it's a very active movement in the state of California. And it's head by Jose Lara and some of the members that are associated with the Tucson, Arizona Mexican American Studies program that was actually outlawed in 2010. And so the movement that we see here today is an actual direct response to HB 2281. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a House bill that was passed in 2011 that outlawed that ethnic studies program because of 4 reasons. And the reasons were that the school district felt, as well as the governor felt, that that Mexican American Studies program might promote the overthrow of the federal and state government, might promote resentment towards any race or class, that would advocate ethnic solidarity, as you know, as if that was a bad thing, or was only designed for a certain ethnicity. So basically that sparked a pretty big movement, and it also sparked educators and scholars to want to study whether or not this was actually the case with that program. And scholars such as Christina Cedillo, for example, she actually found that these claims were false. And in distinction, or just in complete contrast to these claims, that program was actually found to help students want to be in school, to promote their self-esteem, to improve their attendance rates, and to even improve their test scores. And so with all of that information that had been studied and presented in a documentary called Precious Knowledge, the movement of ethnic studies now was created in California, which is where I'm at. And school district by school district, it seems like people are starting to realize the importance of ethnic studies, not only at the higher educational institutional level, but also in the K through 12 curriculum, which is kind of the history behind the statement and why it's so very important right now. And so there is actually a movement starting in Oregon as well that we recently heard about a couple of days ago. So it seems like beyond California, other states are also starting to realize the value of the curriculum in K through 12 levels, reflecting, the different ethnicities, cultures, and histories of students that up until this time people have felt have been largely ignored or left out of mainstream curricula.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for giving us that historical context. And it's interesting to see that this is a topic that has been in the consciousness of educators for decades, and what an important time to have the statement available now. Talk to me a little bit, though. This is a statement that's being authored by the task force and then the other groups that you worked with. These are all groups that work in language, in part of under the umbrella of the National Council of Teachers of English. What's the relationship between ethnic studies and literacy in particular?
Well, I think there's a really intimate connection between ethnic studies and literacy because basically it's only through language that we learn about the different ethnic histories. And there's a lot of ethnic literature that exists out there. African literature, African American literature, Mexican American literature, Latino literature, and all of the different, types of ethnic literature that's out there that's very rich and telling in the different cultural experiences and histories that are not necessarily reflected in the mainstream curriculum in the K through 12 levels. And so I think there is a very intimate connection that perhaps, has been overlooked and in the university system, unless, one is enrolled in an ethnic studies department or, takes ethnic studies electives, they wouldn't necessarily be exposed to that literature. And often they're not really exposed to it at the K through 12 levels because the curriculum there is pretty much set by the state. And that's kind of a problem, right? When the students who are learning literacy are learning only one particular viewpoint through those texts. And especially we see, like in Texas, where a lot of the textbooks come from, the students, who are engaging with literacy through learning language and reading and through different social studies don't necessarily see their experiences reflected in those texts and wouldn't learn, for example, the extensive experiences of Cesar Chavez or Dolores Huerta or Malcolm X. Or Rosa Parks, for example. So they wouldn't really learn about the extensiveness of their experiences and how they were actually pioneers, right, for making achievements in history that actually moved society forward to be more egalitarian overall or to promote their individual ideologies. But, literacy promotes knowledge about, different experiences overall. And if some experiences are left out, then obviously students aren't going to learn about them, and then they're not going to necessarily see themselves as valued in literacy education that is sanctioned by the state and school officials.
So this could have implications for everything from the kinds of courses that are offered in schools, but also the content that exists within the texts that the teachers are teaching.
Yes, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Great. So when I look through this statement, it's incredibly well documented and researched. Can you talk a little bit about the process? How did you said that it was born of a much longer piece, but what was the process that brought you to the piece that we have today?
Putting the task force together was a great idea that was suggested by the NCTE presidential team, because we had, not only one person working on the statement, but 4 different people working on the statement, and they were all really great and very helpful, and they all had different roles. And so each one of us tried to reach out to different caucuses as well as different faculty members who, for example, were more associated with NCTE. So, for example, our other Latino caucus co-chairs, Sandra Osorio and Tracy Flores, they are our co-chairs for the NCTE section. So they actually reached out to K through 12 educators, and through their own research, Tracy Flores is she's a candidate right now for her PhD. She's writing her dissertation. I think that she does Rethinking Education, which is a program for K through 12 and wanting to be more inclusive of different ethnic experiences and inclusive of literacy artifacts too in K through 12 education. And so they were very, very helpful in contributing resources to us that would be, seen as relevant in the 21st century. And so reaching out to the American Indian Caucus as well, giving us resources on how we might include literacy that addresses indigenous populations. And so those resources are meant for educators who don't really feel like they have a familiarity with ethnic studies, but want to know a little bit more about the value of ethnic studies and how to implement it in the classroom. And there are also some resources that give specific suggestions on how to inform their curriculum and implementation in the classroom. So it's both for the educator to learn themselves, but also to have resources to be able to implement in the classroom as well. Because I think that was very important to have, us all pull together like that and gather these resources, because it's not enough just to have a statement, right, that says we agree that ethnic studies should be implemented at K through 12 levels. But the next question is, okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we actually implement that? Or how do we actually advocate for it in our individual school districts when there's actually a lot of resistance to it? So we can't really deny that there is some resistance to it. And so what are the steps to take in our local school districts, all over the nation, to be able to see some kind of value to the implementation of ethnic studies in K through 12? And everybody on the task force obviously agreed with the value and its importance for those levels. And so they were all committed to gathering up resources, as many as we could, and also providing the links for them to make it, accessible to people who look at the statement. And also just very much also thinking about the NCTE mission and how it would fall along with the purpose of NCTE, which is also professional development, right? And so how this could inform further initiatives by NCTE to help this statement actually become a reality and not just a statement.
That's great. Yeah, and even just in your answer right there, you pointed to something else that I noticed in reading through it. It seems as though it's designed not only to meet the needs and interests of that educator audience, but it also has policy implications as well. So can you talk a little bit about how you think both educators and policymakers and decision makers at all different levels within schools and systems, how might they use a statement like this to start discussions or to make changes in the way that they think about their curricula?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and definitely very challenging question, because every state is different, and every school district is different, and the politics in every state is very different. So I imagine that policymakers have very different ideas on the value of ethnic studies overall. And I can really only draw on the experience that I've seen here in California in terms of how it's been implemented school district by school district. And so basically there's some very active people here in California that they're not afraid to put this idea of the implementation of ethnic studies in K through 12 curriculum on the agenda for school board meetings, for example. So, having students and educators alike coming and showing up at school board meetings just to make a case for the importance of the implementation of ethnic studies, getting on the agenda and being able to reach out to community members and talking about the benefits of it overall. Where I think here in California, it's been a little bit of a challenge because we had the AB 101 bill, which was for the implementation of ethnic studies statewide, was actually vetoed by Governor Brown. So that was a little bit of a setback because we didn't have just the blanket implementation statewide. Nevertheless, the ethnic studies now movement is still going strong and they're trying to implement, district by district. So like Sacramento Unified School District, LA Unified School District, what's the other? Salinas Unified School District. So school district by school district, they're starting to realize the importance of it. And most of these communities are majority, students of color are attending their schools. And so pretty much in California, I guess we're probably maybe the most diverse state in the country. And so 3/4 of our students are basically students of color. And so students are very much in support of, the implementation of ethnic studies curricula. So having educators who are willing to experiment with the curriculum overall, see how students respond to it, and getting their support, and then presenting, the benefits of having ethnic studies to the school board, presenting it to policymakers, and not being afraid to be, somewhat of a community activist and trying to promote and push for just a more egalitarian curricula overall is what we feel that ethnic studies represents. And so it's kind of hard to say, exactly how each policymaker would respond to it, but a basic, I guess idea for community activism is kind of like that grassroots activism, and having leaders that are willing to promote ethnic studies as something that would be better for their school district overall, and referring to also like studies by Dr. Christine Cedillo showing the benefits of ethnic studies, right, where it's actually helping students to achieve, helping them to get higher test scores, helping them to want to go on to college, and promoting their self-esteem, and just encouraging them to want to be there at school because they see themselves reflected in the curriculum and they feel proud to be there. So drawing upon all of those positive things about the implementation of ethnic studies, I think is very important to draw upon. And within the statement, we have promoted, and NCTE has endorsed all of these positive attributes that come along with implementation of ethnic studies in K through 12, and they recognize it as well. And so that's why we also felt that it was really important to have this statement be accompanied by a lot of resources and be grounded in research that actually shows the benefits of ethnic studies, because we know that there are people that don't necessarily agree with it.
That's great. Yeah, that's something that that I think is really strong about this one and stands out to me as a statement, is the fact that it pairs all these resources and ideas with the fact that it also has research to show how this works. And in our current educational environment, I feel like that's a really important piece of any proposal for doing things differently. People feeling like they understand that they're not totally going out on the limb, but actually here's some evidence of how this will actually help your students find success in school.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely.
So given that, dream with me for a moment. If this statement were to inspire greater support for and an insurgence of ethnic studies programs across the country, how might we see that change what's happening in the educational landscape in the future?
Yeah, that's a really challenging question also. So, kind of being true to current events and what we see right now. in 21st century. And here in this year in 2015, we are seeing, through social media and other media outlets, increasing incidents of racist acts and of students claiming racism on campus. And so one of them recently has been Yale University, and another one has been, I believe, Missouri State, where the football team is protesting, against racist practices there. We see the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And now we're seeing the ethnic studies movement. And all of these things kind of together are showing that we do have a problem with racism in our country. And I think people are not necessarily willing to admit that, because it's kind of, it's just a touchy subject, and people either, kind of turn off, they either turn off by the subject, or they kind of get a little upset about the subject, or very upset about the subject. And but it's something that we still have to deal with, even though, we can say we had a civil rights movement in 1968 with Martin Luther King, and one of his precepts was for people to be judged by the content of the character and not the color of their skin. And unfortunately, we still have not reached that ideal. And I think it was in 2013 when Angela Davis presented at the Four Cs conference and in Indianapolis. And she also claimed too that, we still have yet to achieve the civil rights that was desired at that time. And so that was a really interesting statement, and that really got to me, because at that time we were kind of talking about immigrant rights. But like I said, through social media, you kind of see that there's this kind of increasing dissatisfaction by student populations, especially in higher education, and a dissatisfaction with the way that races are getting along with one another. And, again, it's kind of this idea where people are reacting and acting off of racial stereotypes of what they believe about one another. And this might have something to do with not necessarily learning about each other, right? Each other's cultures, each other's histories, each other's experiences, each other's, trials and tribulations, and also for communities of color to learn to have pride within themselves and learning about their achievements and people who are heroes for them that they don't necessarily see in history textbooks. And so it's probably a really, far-reach and idealistic thing to say, but in state-sanctioned institutions, to be able to see oneself in the curriculum and to see oneself valued in the curriculum, and to have others, not just students of color, but white students as well, learn, kind of a critical consciousness of other races, other cultures, other histories, other ethnicities, brings people a little bit closer together and fosters a respect for one another. So of course, things like this, they're very idealistic and they would take a lot of time. But we see in our task force season, our caucus season, I think NCTE also sees that the implementation of ethnic studies in a real and serious manner, not just in a token manner, but in a very serious manner, and trying to draw upon all of the resources that are already existing out there for ethnic studies, the implementation of that in the public school systems, and through the K-12 levels would help to alleviate that, to provide a better understanding of one another, and to combat those stereotypes, right? And to allow people to have pride in their different communities, and allow them to have resources to be able to help out their communities, and to allow them to have the motivation to want to continue to succeed and go to college. And for me, it's kind of like it's a trickle-down effect, but it has to start off from the bottom. It can't just be only in the universities and trickle down. It has to be from kindergarten all the way up. It starts, from a very young age.
No, well, I think you've provided, you and the task force have provided a powerful resource for beginning to see that happen. So thank you for all the work that you put into it. And I know that NCTE is looking forward to sharing this broadly with our members and beyond. So thank you for your work, and thank you for taking time tonight to talk to us about it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We're so very thankful to NCTE for endorsing our statement as well. And we're happy to answer any other questions about it. And we hope to see more workshops on the implementation of ethnic studies at NCTE as well. And we're looking forward to the up and coming conference.
Great. All right. We'll look forward to seeing you there.
All right. Thank you.